Hello and welcome back to Uncultured Swine, the podcast where we take you through the wonderful worlds of Ian M. Banks' Culture series. I'm a ship.
And I'm Johnny.
And we're back tonight to cover part 2 of 6 of Surface Detail, chapters 6 through 10, after a very unexpectedly brief introductory episode.
Yes. And in this episode, or rather in this portion of the text, some person or people, possibly including the author of this work, seem to be trying to give off the impression that the culture might be bad.
What makes you say that?
A variety of things that we shall get into. So let's start off with chapter 6, which has nothing to do with my main thesis for this particular episode, because it doesn't have anything to do with the culture, at least as far as we can thus far tell. This is the summation of a scene that we saw earlier with Prin and Che's escape from hell.
Indeed. Prin is in demon form still and trying, right at the exit of hell, and in a big hurry to get out because, hell.
Yeah, he's making a dramatic exit as well as he possibly can, flying past hordes of demons, trying to get to the gate before anything can happen. He hears a number counting down, realizes that there's probably a limit to how many people can go through the gate, and at the moment, only one more person can go through the gate, which means that it's either going to be Prin or Che. Possibly. He's not sure. He's guessing about this, but, it's a reasonable guess.
Yeah, it would totally make sense to have, it would make no sense at all to have a hell with no exit restrictions. Like, everybody would just go looking for this place and run out.
Yeah. It could also be other things, though, because it could be those are the assigned numbers that people have, for example, but it might not mean that there's an automatic system, because there is already a lot of security on this door, right? There's a bunch of demons everywhere. Anyway, this is irrelevant, because he is correct, and he painfully makes the decision that if only him or Che can, make the trip out successfully, it's better that it be him, because as much as he loves Che and as much as he would sacrifice everything for her if he needed to, realistically, she's gone mad and she probably isn't going to help anything. Whereas if he gets out, he can come back for her.
Yeah. His original mission relies on Che is not able to accomplish her original mission, basically. And he still is.
Indeed. Of course, he still hopes, and, the way the scene goes is, both of them tumble through the gate, but he tumbles through first, and he's hoping they will both wake up in the material reality and everything will be fine. But we do not know, because this storyline, this part of the storyline is made up entirely of cliffhangers.
That's certainly an accurate assessment of this chapter.
Yes.
And that brings us into chapter 7.
Yes. Don't worry, folks. We are going to slow down when we reach the chapters with content in them. And this is one of them. So,
indeed. We begin on one of those wheels with a capital W that Sensia talked about.
Yes. Banks does love his capitonyms, doesn't he? There's a bit mentioned in an earlier culture book about how Moraine pronounces capitonyms. If you have a capitonym, it's pronounced differently than the non-capital version. That's a good language feature, but goddammit, Banks, English doesn't have it, so this is a very confusing way to name all your shit.
There is a short story from Slate Star Codex where the narrator talks about how the person he's talking to made the capital letter unmistakable.
Yeah, I remember, because that's what you mentioned when we were talking about this the last time on the podcast. I remember this because this is the episode I just edited. You said,
God damn it, am I getting predictable?
No, but it wasn't Slate Star Codex. It was Schlock Mercenary.
Ah, well, yeah, there's also a short story from Slate Star Codex that does it. One about alchemy and the search for immortality.
Oh, yes?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Something was an art, and they made the capital letter in art unmistakable.
That's the one.
Yes. Redacting a textbook was an art. I remember even the specific thing.
That you are thinking of exactly the right story.
I haven't read it, but you've told me this story before.
Fair. And now I'm thinking of ways that you would make this distinction in a constructed language. without dwelling too long on the subject, Banks's extremely unimaginative phonology makes me really short on ideas.
Well, it could just be a matter of, like, you know, changing your pitch or saying the word slower and with more, like, obvious gravitas.
That's possible. But the culture is very short on gravitas, hence all of the names we've been coming across.
Okay, there's like 6, okay, not 6, but there's like at least 3 names that are about gravitas, but nevertheless, the culture has a fair bit of gravitas most of the time.
Yes, but they also have ships that, well, I think the first one we encountered was in use of weapons when one of the ships is called Very Little Gravitas Indeed.
Yeah, and the experiencing a terminal gravitas shortfall, the death in gravitas, there's several.
Oh, that one actually says gravity. That one's in accession, and it's
Dang.
definitely just gravity.
Darn.
But it does come up several times, yes.
Anyway, I'm sure, listeners, you're enjoying this return to the tangents that you so missed in the last episode. But, to continue with the chapter, he's on a wheel, which is a big, stupid luxury land ship, basically. We get a lot of stuff about the principles of its design, but basically just imagine the aesthetics and design principles of a cruise ship applied to a very large land vehicle.
I would call it more of a yacht, since this one is owned by Vepers and used to show off to people. So imagine a yacht that's capable of just destroying random people's houses for being in the way.
So, is the distinction between a yacht and a cruise ship that a cruise ship is designed to carry a bunch of people on a vacation or whatever, and a yacht is something that a private asshole owns?
Yes.
Okay.
That there may be other things, but yes, that completely covers it.
And on this cruise... Damn it! And on this land yacht, he is, living the opulent life that he usually does, and we sort of see him dealing with the aftermath of the hunt for Ledege. The most important thing that happens is that his nose is healing up fine, I guess, and that he realizes that Ledege Ibrek had a neural lace, and thus probably survived her death in some form. They discover this because they incinerated her body, but the neural lace was left behind.
Which, when you go to that much trouble to thoroughly kill someone, I can understand how that would be disturbing.
I suppose so. I mean, I would assume he's just worried that he's gonna get caught, right? Because even if he's immune to consequences, he's not immune to embarrassment. The particularities of that case make him look like a jackass.
Indeed. But I'm thinking from Demon King Academy. Did you really think I'd die just because I was killed?
Yes, listeners, if you enjoy shows that are dumb and very good, I very much recommend The Misfit of Demon Lord Academy.
It's, the line alone is worth a lot. But yeah, dumb and
it's
good
his catchphrase. He is frequently disappointed in people for thinking that killing him will be sufficient to make him die.
It's a good philosophy. Like, it's a really good question to just be able to say with a straight face. That's a hell of a power move.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the show in a nutshell. It's nothing but that guy doing power moves for, a 20-minute television segment of anime. If you enjoy power fantasies, it's one of the more obvious ones. Go on, sorry.
At any rate, yeah, Vepers is very disturbed by this news. We get some more exposition of him being a generally shitty human being and also someone who greatly enjoys the power that his money gives him over other people. Yep. Like having he's got a large harem that in particular includes 2 shapeshifters so that he can sleep with the appearance of any woman he wants, even if he's somehow not able to get her consent.
So, yeah, well, they're not shapeshifters, but they are like, the term he uses is impressionists, and I don't think they're shapeshifters because it's mentioned that they often have to undergo, like, surgical procedures to look like the person that is the object of his desires. Their talent is in being able to mimic the mannerisms.
Fair. Shapeshifting harem sounds cooler, though.
Yes, but it's not quite accurate.
But we know that it's... is there any disagreement, though, that this is totally something Vepers would have if his civilization could give it to him?
Sure, but it still says something about his civilization that he can't get it, I guess. Anyway, This is mainly used as a delivery mechanism for more stuff about why we should hate Vepers because he's an asshole, because it is used to show that he has a very, I don't even want to say like transactional approach in how he thinks about women, just like a sort of careless, smug asshole approach that it doesn't really map cleanly onto anything except being an aristocrat. It's very much the same character flaw that we saw from General Yed Amadeus in Inversions, where he makes use of a lot of prostitutes and treats them poorly.
It's funny, I've read this one several times, but I haven't actually read it since about the time of the last presidential election. Not the Biden one, the Trump one. And I realize now that I'm rereading this, and especially in this section, that Vepers is the second closest fictional character match I've ever encountered to Donald Trump.
Okay, then you need to watch more media, because there are several characters who are just explicitly based on him. I imagine you're thinking of Biff Tannen for number one, but
I'm actually not.
Oh?
The closest that I'm thinking of is the Beast from Transmetropolitan.
Ah, now that I am unfamiliar with and thus can't comment on, but Biff Tannen is literally a Donald Trump analog.
Okay, well, I've actually never seen, what is that, Back to the Future?
Yes, oh my gosh. Well, for once I am the one saying, what the hell, why haven't you seen that? Go watch Back to the Future.
I'll put it on my list, but I have a lot of media to consume, and since a close friend of mine and one of our patrons, the Hobo Demon, has film tastes that are different enough for mine to be interesting, I end up frequently on my movie night watching something he suggested instead of something off my own list. I'm not at all annoyed by that, but it does happen a lot.
Fair enough. But regardless, I don't think Vepers is a very close analog there, because he is described as very personally charming and charismatic, which is not how I think of Donald Trump. Like, in addition to being powerful and everyone having to kind of, like, pretend that they like him even if they don't, he also happens to be incredibly charming and likable.
Okay, that's valid. That does weaken the similarity a bit. I guess, as with the Beast, the similarity is just there's something aesthetic about him that pattern matches very strongly for me.
Fair enough.
But yeah, now that you bring it up, I absolutely follow.
Though, remind me, I gotta put Transmetropolitan on our list of things to read if we haven't got it there already, because I really want to. I've heard a lot of good things about those books.
It's one of the best comic series I've ever read.
I thought it was... Was it adapted into comics?
I'm pretty sure it started as a comic. I don't actually know about a textual version of it.
Huh. I really thought it was text, but I could easily be mistaken.
In any case, it's good, and you absolutely should read it. And
sure.
The art also, like, everything about it is done well. The art stands out. And there's some really good, particularly in the early series, there's some really good discussion of transhumanist topics.
Something to look forward to. So, anyway, back to this series. We learn a couple of things about S'chult, just incidentally, as the chapter is going on. We learn that this society practices eugenics, or at least it respects it as an academic discipline, because one of the women that Vepers took a brief interest in was a brilliant and also conventionally attractive academic who was distinguished in her chosen field of eugenics.
It sounds very much like Banks does not want us to like the S'chultians.
And if that wasn't enough, they have also banned both neural laces and drug glands. Which, like, they could use them, but they're illegal.
Yeah. Oh, as far as the Vepers character, and that this one does seem pretty Trumpy to me, and I think this is the last time I'll bring up that comparison. They go to significant effort to fabricate a convincing cover story to explain the injuries that Lededge inflicted.
Yes, up to and including giving his fake dueling opponent some appropriate retributive dueling injuries.
Yeah, it's like, we can't have anyone thinking you actually beat me.
Or at least that, like, such an indignity as this injury went unmatched.
Yes. And that particular stroke of ego, definitely. That's part of the pattern match. And he considers that killing Lededge might not have been the best idea, even before he finds out about the neural lace, and reflects that, well, because Banks apparently really wants to drop the anvils, Vepers reflects that Lededge is both the first person he raped and the first person he murdered.
Yes, and, in classic egomaniacal style, he muses that perhaps that makes up for some of the inconvenience she has caused him.
Ugh.
Indeed.
I learned this week about the IRL thing, not specifically related to Vepers, but your pointing that out made me think of it. Stories you don't want to hear more of. I learned this week about the Deerlevanger Brigade.
Well, why would you tell me if I don't want to hear more about it?
I will. I'm going to tell you the important part. So, this was a Waffen SS unit, led by someone clearly selected for his psychopathic tendencies, and with the NCO positions filled by SS officers who had problematic disciplinary records. You know that you're going to have a bunch of, quote, fun, end quote, when the story begins with, this is a Waffen SS penal unit.
Yeah. These are the Nazis who were too crazy and couldn't be trusted to do normal Nazi stuff.
Yeah, they were unironically used as a terror weapon anywhere that the Polish resistance popped up. That was kind of their shtick. And anybody who cares to hear more about that story after knowing that it begins with this is a Waffen SS penal unit is invited to Google them, but not really for this podcast.
And I would encourage you not doing that unless you have some reason you need to know, because that sounds very unpleasant.
That's a good description.
Anyway, does anything else of consequence happen in Chapter 8 here? Or, sorry, in Chapter 7 here?
I wouldn't say. The neural lace is definitely the focus of the chapter, and we've kind of talked that to death. Yeah, there's nothing else important.
I guess we didn't really say what they intend to do with it, because their plan basically is just like, okay, so she had a neural lace. What does that imply? That implies she probably could have survived her death. Okay, well, who would have put a neural lace in her? We don't really know, but it looks like culture technology, so insofar as it's anyone, it's going to be them. Okay, well, let's contact our envoys in the culture such as they are.
Right, that is the important connection back to the plot. There are only a few players in the Sechultian, in the sphere of interaction of Sechultian civilization who could have given her the lace, and they figure the culture's most likely.
Yes. Of course, within the culture, it could be anyone, because their whole distributed and non-reporting civilizational aesthetic means that anyone could have chosen to do it for their own personal reasons.
And we, of course, know that is, in fact, how it happened. The ship that gave her the lace was an eccentric, and the act of giving the lace was not exactly official.
Indeed.
Yes, on to Chapter 8.
So here, we learn about the war in heaven that I think was briefly mentioned without a lot of context, but here we pretty much get all the context to understand the conflict. So the TLDR is, and this goes on throughout a chapter while an extended action scene is also happening, but the background of the conflict is, once upon a time, there were people that were born, and they thought, hey, it sucks that we die, things should be more meaningful than that, there's probably an afterlife. And then, for civilizationally useful reasons, they also came up with the idea that there's a bad afterlife if you do enough bad things in the material reality, and those are broadly speaking referred to as hells. Then, a bunch of them advanced past where they were and created synthetic afterlives because they still don't like the whole dying thing. The size and scale and importance of those afterlives varies, but nevertheless, a lot of them popped up in various forms. Most of them were broadly positive. You just go to a good afterlife when you die, and that's fine. Some of them included the negative afterlives as well, the synthetic hells, like the ones we have seen mentioned. A lot of civilizations took issue to this because, that's a lot of torture you're doing, and if it doesn't, the ends may not justify the means, and also the means may be unpalatable regardless of the ends when you're talking about torturing people for possibly eternity, or at least you're kind of hoping it's eternity. And this conflict was sort of slowly being ameliorated in one way and another. The culture was trying to get rid of synthetic hells by what else? Cultural imperialism, just making it ungentlemanly on the galactic stage to be the sort of person who is seen having a synthetic hell, and that was doing some amount of good. Other people were doing, official sanctions against the people who had these synthetic hells. That was doing some amount of good, but the conflict was still nonetheless sticking around. So eventually, as a way to settle things once and for all, a large group of civilizations that think you shouldn't have synthetic hells, and a separate, also large group of civilizations that think you should have synthetic hells, decided to have a virtual war, much like the one Holst talked about, and stand by the result. If the synthetic hell team wins, then they get to keep their synthetic hells, and everyone else has to stop bothering them about it. If the not synthetic hells team wins, you gotta free all the people in the synthetic hells.
Actually, good to connect that back to Matter. I kind of forgot because we're reading in non-publication order, but that is the most recently published book apart from this one. At time of publication, this is the most recent book, so that's actually a good callback, and I think
this is very literally the thing that Holst was talking about, right? He was like, if you have such a good simulation, why not just abide by the simulation and say whoever has won that wins, What's the point of all these people dying? And here we do get an answer to that, and that's that if you really care, you're gonna do whatever you can to win, which means if you start losing the simulation, you'll give it another try in reality. So, right now what's happening is that one of the sides, we don't know which, is about to start cheating to win. They're gonna start hacking into the simulation, they're gonna start doing various underhanded stuff in material reality to try to gain an advantage.
Yes, which is, as you said, the opposite of the point of this whole thing.
Yes.
It's interesting that the mind state transcription is as ancient as the chapter explicitly says that it is. That the deliberate either afterlife or consciousness preservation is something that evidently pretty much everybody develops. You wouldn't, for example, expect the biologically immortal adherents to bother with it.
Well, but then again, the adherents had an afterlife concept, which I found very odd and kind of unimaginative world building, right? Because, the adherents are immortal. They don't die except pretty much in combat, right? Presumably you assume some of them die in accidents, but that has to be a tiny number given how, ridiculously resilient and well-armored they are. So, it's pretty much you die in combat or that's it. But they have an almost identical culture which says that if you die in combat, you go to honor afterlife. If you die in not combat, you go to bullshit, you didn't do good enough afterlife, which is very recognizable to us. But the fact that it's so similar to cultural things we would understand seems like a kind of failure of an imagination to me.
I mean, so my understanding of Norse mythology is patchy, but it sounds kind of like Valhalla on steroids.
Yeah, but it's also a bunch of other things, right? This is a common idea that you have in a lot of different warrior cultures, right? Is this one that, if you die in battle, that is honorable, and you are going to be rewarded in the world beyond, It's a very common idea, and I guess you can say that the fact that it's common means that it is, to some degree, selected for, and so maybe we should expect to see it in aliens that have various other similarities to us. But at the same time, it's the fact that you can live forever doesn't add anything to that. It doesn't change your perceptions at all.
That is a bit weird now that you point it out.
Yeah. But anyway,
so there is all the discussion that we've just gone over, and there is, in addition to that, there's a fight going on that is apparently part of this virtual war.
Yeah, so the action scene going on, I can sum up much more simply, thankfully. Basically, there is a robot which has the mind of someone uploaded into it. The mind upload didn't go very well. It was just done improperly. It was, the download didn't fully complete. So it is missing some critical components of its personality. It does not know why it is fighting. It does not know what the war objectives it is fighting for are. And it does not know what the command codes to accept commands are. But it does know that it should kill anyone who doesn't give the command codes, which has left it in the unenviable position of killing anyone that it meets, which is why a bunch of people who are talking to it keep telling it to stand down because it's killing its own side.
Yeah. Awkward position to be when you get thrown into something like that and with no memory of which side you're on.
Indeed. My thoughts here are basically, so this, in any situation where you include simulations as a big part of what you're doing, right, of your story, you always encourage the audience to kind of wonder what is and isn't a simulation. And there seems to be with this a great degree of internal, how to put it, people are often unsure that they're in a simulation in this story. The general who is fighting like, so outside the simulation there's the guy who has gone into this simulation to fight the war in hell. Another layer inside of that, there's a guy in the war in hell who is like a commander somewhat high up in there. Another layer into that, he's in a simulation where he's a robot, because it's a projection of a mind in a body that he also has. So, things are... Put it this way, I'm not going to be very surprised if it turns out that one or more of these story threads are taking place in a simulation when they have been implied not to.
Okay, so you're expecting a variation of the Inception plot?
Yeah, we're gonna get some Inception twist. If I had to guess, I would say the Inception twist is gonna be in the Prin and Shay storyline. Like, we're gonna find out much, much later that it's like, oh, and what they thought was itself material reality is also not material reality. It's a part of the war in heaven.
Okay, nice specific, well, not exactly specific, but that is a nice testable prediction. Let's write it down.
Yeah, because what they're doing doesn't really make a lot of sense unless it's either happening before the events of the story or not, quote-unquote, really happening, right? Because so their goal, ostensibly, Prin and Shay's goal, is to, like, let the galactic community know about the horrors of the synthetic hell, right? But I kind of don't buy that the galactic community doesn't know if the government organizes tours of hell, like, semi-frequently.
That's fair. And also, there's a war going on, as you said, so clearly the idea of these hells existing is known in general. Even if so that there, as you say, must be some reason for Prin and Shay to need to get information about the one they went to.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible in principle that some civilizations are keeping their synthetic hells entirely secret, but if you're doing that, you remember that conversation in Doctor Strangelove about the Doomsday device?
That the world-destroying radiation, like dirty bomb, is an impractical deterrent because nobody can be deterred by things they don't know exist?
Yeah, I think Doctor Strangelove's line is, "Of course, for this to work, you must tell your opponent that you have it!"
Yeah, the point of a doomsday device is lost. If you keep it a secret, why didn't you tell everyone? Why didn't you tell the world?
Yes. Go watch Doctor Strangelove, people. It's a good movie.
Yeah, you really should not need us to tell you that. But if you do, go watch Doctor Strangelove.
Indeed. Yeah, much the same with the synthetic hell. What Prin and Shay imply that, or rather, I guess just Prin, because Shay is, broken by madness. But Prin pretty much implies that the civilization has a concept that the hell exists, but most people think it's mythological or don't believe it's real, hence the tours. But that means that someone is saying it's real, So it can't be something that everyone thinks is fake. And it can't be something hidden entirely from the galactic community.
Not entirely, but there's a lot that could be going on. We'll presumably be hearing from Prin again.
Fair enough.
It'd be a real shame to drop a plot thread like this.
Yes. Let's see. So those are the main threads going through this chapter, so I feel like I could just mention a couple of other things that I found interesting. In a description of like how societies just sort of plug along in the culture universe, there's a phrase, easy spaceflight, free energy, amusingly cooperative AIs, which should kind of be the slogan or the tagline for the culture. That's what you put on the marketing.
Now I kind of want to make that my, put that in my Twitter bio.
That'd be a good one, yes.
Easy spaceflight, yep.
Easy spaceflight, free energy, amusingly cooperative AIs. We also get an argument here on I want to use the phrase bête noire, but I'm not actually sure what that means.
Bête noire is like a nemesis.
Yeah, okay, then that's precisely what I mean. We get something on my old bête noire, the culture's stance on immortality. We get an argument here implying that the reason you can't have both immortality and unrestricted breeding is that you'll require ever-increasing amounts of matter and energy to support all the people that you're making, because you're expanding outwards endlessly. And the galactic civilizations have pretty much declared by general don't be a dick agreement that if you try to take more than your fair share of the universe's bounty, you will be stopped from doing so. So insofar as it was never an option, and they're making the best with what they have, I can at least see some amount of logic to the culture's mortality policies.
Fair. Oddly, apart from the exposition about the war, I tend to mostly remember about this chapter the very detailed account of Vatoy's doomed fight.
Yes. So the way that Vatoy, by the way, another thing that I should have mentioned, and I don't think we got to, Vatoy is, he's the tunneler from before, but he is frequently reincarnated because people who fight in the war in hell don't actually get killed, they get reevaluated, and if they are doing a very good job, they will be moved up the command structure even if they were killed. So Vatoy has done good enough times that it has gotten him into a position of command, and his first life was that tunneler gig that we saw him die in Chapter 2. And the reason he showed distinction there was, A, he was creative. You know, he did all the right things to try and survive, even though they didn't work out. And B, he was instrumentally useful in helping them figure out that not telling people what they're fighting for is not a very good way to go about things.
It does generally seem like a poor idea.
Yes, because he had, let's say, some morale problems.
Getting killed over and over with no knowledge of why. Granted, I've worked in a call center, so maybe I'm just calloused, but I can... It seems pretty bad. For most people, it's probably worse.
Yeah, I mean, that was the first time he had been reincarnated, right? So he didn't even know that was his circumstance. He just thought he was a guy on a medieval world, right?
Yeah, there's no indication in chapter, 2, that we met him in, that he's got any awareness of what he's participating in. So, while, not knowing which side you're on is still shitty, it's a marked improvement over the situation that he was in when we met him.
Yes. Though this does seem to be, and I can't help but think this, a possible thematic thing, right? Because every time we've met him, he feels like he's doing something for no reason and doesn't know why he's fighting, right? Like, the first time, it was because he had horrible nightmares that this conflict was, or not the conflict, but like his specific mission was pointless and hopeless, and he could never accomplish it, and he would just labor forever towards a goal that he could never reach. And this time, he's fighting, but he's fighting against people that he doesn't have any disagreement with because he's been ordered to. And, in fact, people that are his friends and allies. And then when he, sort of zooms back out, a very deliberate effort is made to make sure that we don't know which side he's on. It's never specified whether he's on the pro-heaven side or the pro-hell side or the anti-hell side.
Yeah, I don't think there's any side in an anti-heaven, or there's any anti-heaven side in a war about this.
No, that's not what this one's about. What a dickhead you'd have to be.
Yes, I was gonna say, like, I feel like that civilization would just kind of get iced out of the galactic community before the
politely pushed out of the galaxy.
Yeah, or as in with the Yogg in Mass Effect and humanity in one South Park episode, just kind of quarantined from contact with anyone else.
Oh, so it's mentioned that the game has, like, referees, administrators. I immediately forgot their name, but are these the same fuckers who administrated the Damage game? Because they're mentioned as being civilizationally known for their humorless admiration for fairness.
The Ishlor Tsunami who are refereeing this war are in fact the same race who refereed the Damage game and Consider Phlebas, yes.
Hey, continuity.
Indeed. The series doesn't have much, but the bits that Banks does throw in tend to be pretty good.
Indeed. Rewards you for having read all the stuff. But yeah, so you were talking about his Vitoy's experiences fighting this battle. I found it interesting just because the way he thinks is clearly impacted by not having his whole brain around. Like, he thinks in patterns and subroutines in a very, sort of non-human way.
Yeah, he's supposed to be pretty integrated with the space tank, it's implied, and we get definitely some space tank thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Like, he keeps thinking about things as hard or medium cover, and he sort of muses at one point, like, I wonder what this thing is. Like, he just kind of can't conceptualize it as anything other than tactically useful object.
That is either him being, I can't tell if that's him being brain damaged or the space tank just being that much of the overall melded mind. I will point out, though, that if you have ever taken or are ever inclined to take a defensive shooting class, understanding the difference between concealment, that is, things that make it you hard to aim at, and cover, things that make you hard to actually shoot, that difference is very significant and will be drummed into your head.
I suppose that's just them telling you, like, don't hide behind, like, drywall if someone's shooting at you already, because bullets go through drywall, that sort of thing.
Yes, or if you are taking shelter behind a car, make sure that the engine is between you and the person shooting, because it's the only part of a car that bullets won't go through easily.
Interesting. My instinct would be the opposite, but I guess that's just from Hollywood telling me that cars explode if you shoot them in the engine.
Yeah, that definitely doesn't happen.
Can it happen? Like, is there a part of a car that you can shoot that will make it explode?
I mean, if it's a Tesla, the battery might explode when shot, but if you're talking about...
famously flammable.
But if you're talking about standard gasoline engine car, no, the engine is pretty undangerous, and you definitely want that big block of steel there to absorb bullets for you.
Interesting. So, like, I'm not super familiar with how cars work, but there is a bunch of gasoline in it, right? Like, isn't there, if you hit the gas tank, wouldn't that be bad?
I mean, the gas would leak out, but I vaguely remember Mythbusters testing how bad it was to have the gas tank hit with bullets, and they found that even with tracers, which have a little tiny bit of white phosphorus usually, it's remarkably hard to just set off standing fuel.
Huh. Go figure. Learn something new every day.
Now, if a subsequent bullet hit something made of steel and sparked, then that could totally ignite the pool of fuel from a punctured gas tank. But that is a different sort of problem.
Yeah, do not try this at home, kiddos. Do not go shooting your car with an AK-47. But if you're in that situation, better to not get shot.
Indeed. Anywho, the space tank is shot repeatedly. Like, Vatoy goes through he leads them on a merry dance through this orbital factory thing, and gives a good account of himself, causes several casualties to his own side, which he doesn't know is his own side, successfully
Indeed.
baits them into wasting the only heavy weapon they have that can harm him directly.
Indeed. He does a very good job killing all the people that he shouldn't be killing. Of course, because of the reasons why he's doing this. When the enemy shows up, he also tries to kill them, but it's very hard to tell how he did it at that, because by that point he's lost most of his sensors, and eventually he gets shucked out of an airlock and onto the planet that he thought was so beautiful.
Yes, but we know he must be a fairly big deal because his own side considers it worth using a nuclear warhead to try to deal with him.
Yeah, he's a very dangerous combat robot tank.
As you hope when you build one of those.
Yeah. I mean, you can never guarantee that a system is going to work right? But you would hope that the mind uploading part would at least have some fail-safes.
Yes. Of course, they may also not know how dangerous that is.
That's true, and this could be like a 1 in a million thing, where like, the overwhelming majority of the time that a mind upload fails, it just doesn't do anything, rather than uploading a partially completed thing that is still sentient and still tries to kill people.
Yeah. Anyway, eventually he's destroyed, and he appears in a room of the War Council of the side that he's on.
Yes. They are described as being in something like a trapeze setup, because they are suspended in the air. They refer to themselves by colors rather than by anything else, and they have like synthetic bodies so that they do not know and cannot identify who they are after the war.
Always a good sign when you don't want to be associated with something you're devoting lots of time and energy to.
Yes, well, I suppose I imagine one of the conditions of the war was that nobody on either side would be persecuted for, like, war crimes done inside the simulation, and thus they don't want a lot of public knowledge of who was administering stuff.
That's entirely fair. Like, very entirely fair.
Anyway, they basically are discussing, okay, so, is now the time where we are sufficiently losing that we need to cheat, that we need to take things to the next level, as they put it. Allow the war to escalate and try to hack into material reality in order to win the war.
Yes. So, this whole war that exists to prevent an actual war from being fought, are we gonna say, fuck that, and, commit acts of actual war?
And of course, the answer is yes, because they want to win.
Yes.
Anyway, that's pretty much all we get in this chapter, as far as I understand it.
The ending line is interesting. What was one more betrayal amongst so many?
I don't quite know the context there, or like what is being conveyed there.
So it's, hang on, let me take a quick skim of how that ends.
Because I imagine he would have had to be talking about, oh yes, now I recall. So he was generally talking about, like, how he how he and a bunch of the other people fighting in this war had to give up stuff they thought was important in order to win the war. And in particular, he was talking about how they had just given up the, like, general area of space in which he had first died in that tunneling thing. Like, all that nonsense that he was trying to do has come to nothing by his own choice, because it's just not worth fighting for, and they need to do anything they can to increase their chances of winning the overall war. And he feels much the same about, it is implied that he feels much the same about the, like, honor of his society that they are sacrificing to try and win this war by cheating.
Fair. That, I think, is all that we could really talk about with 8. We've gone over the fight. As much as I like reading it, no reason to make our listeners go here rather than listening to the magnificent Peter Kenny for the blow-by-blow. So,
yes, indeed.
So let us move in.
Peter Kenny, the canonical
pronouncer.
I want to give him some sort of epitaph, like the canonical Peter Kenny, given that we do like to say that his pronunciations are always correct.
Let's see. There's got to be some sort of Banksy sounding title for that. All right, I declare Peter Kenny the illocutor of this series. With a capital
Giver
E.
of pronouncements would also work. It would depend on which kind of society Banks has evaluated us as having, right? Because the culture would give it a name that's very like literal. In fact, literal to the point of being somewhat confusing because it's almost not a title. Whereas if it's something other than the culture or something other than a culture like civilization, it would probably be something based in Latin.
Right. Illocutor is based in Latin, and also, I've never heard it used as a noun. I've heard variations on it, so it fits in with the way that Banks likes to invent words.
Illocutor based on elocution, right?
Yes.
It's interesting. I've definitely never heard that name. I have heard interlocutor, and I never really thought that the two were related.
I mean, there's that big root right there.
Yes, that's true, but I'd never thought of it before. Anyway.
The more you know.
Chapter 9. Indeed. The more you know, the more you know. Chapter 9, we learn about the Quietus branch. And more generally, we learn that the Culture's Contact organization has spun off several different sub-organizations. They are Quietus, who deals with matters regarding the simulated dead. Two other ones, there's one that deals with hegemonizing swarms and one that deals with the sublimed. What are the names?
Restoria deals with Grey Goose scenarios, and Numina deals with the sublimed.
Right.
And Quietus, uniquely among all of these contact agencies, takes pride in having a big ol' stick up its butt.
Yeah, Quietus is, like... Yeah, that's a fair way to put it, but, like, to put it as they would say it, I suppose... They see themselves as a very serious organization, and perhaps to deal with the people that they deal with, right? They want to give off an impression that they are the kind of people who are so dedicated to their work as to have no desire or interest in any kind of fun.
Having been that person, I can attest that it's stupid.
Yes, well, nevertheless, Yaim and Soke, the one that I said previously was boring and officious, at least now has kind of a reason to be boring and officious because she's fitting in with the culture of her particular subgroup. Everyone in the Quietus branch is, like, unusually not fun-having. They are people who are dedicated both to duty and to sort of being perceived as the sort of people who are serious about being dedicated to duty.
Fair. Fun aside about Quietus, which does distinguish it very sharply both from Contact in general and especially SC, there's none of this information silo bullshit like we saw in Accession. Quietus's organizational structure at the level of ships is supposed to be perfectly flat. So, and I guess the limitations of direct democracy when humans practice it are not really a problem when you're talking about things that beat us by a factor of 100 million in thoughts per second. So this is something that could actually be practical.
I would point out that the whole culture is kind of supposed to have a flat organizational structure where, at least in theory, everyone has an equal say on how the society is going to move forward. And, like, we've seen how that's gone in the past, right? So the fact that we are told they have a flat organizational structure, like, maybe they give more lip service to that, and maybe they in fact do it, and maybe they take it more seriously. I could certainly see that from them, but in practice, I bet there's still clique politic bullshit about who gets to know things.
That's reasonable. Still, it's interesting that, certainly unlike SC, they at least claim to not work that way.
Yes. Let's see. So, the general thing that happens in this chapter, we learn about the Quietus branch. We learn that it considers itself to have jurisdiction about the matter of Lidej Ibrek because she was... Well, for one thing, because she was a dead person who got revived, and so she's kind of vaguely under their umbrella anyway. But more importantly, because Vepers, and the Vepers Corporation he controls, happens to control ancient manufacturing facilities that are of significance to the War in Heaven, because... Actually, I'm not quite clear on why they're important.
Because it's clearly an expected contingency that this war might spill into reality, in which case these facilities would be potentially relevant to the war effort.
Fair enough, I suppose, and given that it is spilling into reality now, albeit in like low-key ways. This still isn't like a shooting war. It's now a hacking war, but clearly they're escalating, and it could escalate a few steps further rapidly.
Yes. And we're talking about a multi-million-year-old manufacturing complex built by an interstellar civilization, which complex is also the size of the rings around a gas giant. So,
listeners, please insert Necromundia here.
Necromunda has rings?
No, I'm just saying insert in your mind a giant factory world.
Oh. Okay, yeah, that I guess works.
I was just thinking of it because there's a game that came out somewhat recently.
Yes, I have seen some of our acquaintances from one of the RPG groups talking about it.
Yes. I do not endorse it. I don't not endorse it, but I have no idea if it's good.
That's fair. I also have no actual knowledge of this game, just that somebody I know who likes Warhammer stuff has been talking about it.
Fair enough. So, we see... God damn it, I forget her name every time I'm not looking right at it. We see Yaimon Sake basically get put in charge of the Ledej Ibrek case, with the goal of intercepting her to... Again, I'm not quite clear whether it's her job to stop her from getting to the ship that originally found her, or to facilitate her going to that ship.
It sounds like they would want to have some control over the outcome either way.
Yeah, just generally get involved with it. So, what's the ship's name again? The one that originally found
The Me
her?
I'm Counting is the
Right.
ship that gave her the lace. Or are you asking about the ship that she's now on?
I'm talking about the ship that gave her the
Oh, then
lace.
yes, that's the Me I'm
They
Counting.
think...
Which, incidentally, didn't bring this up last episode, but probably should have. That is a 2-book callback to Look to Windward.
I don't remember this.
You remember the conversation about ridiculous ship names?
Yep, I do remember that. That probably... I should have guessed, because that's where the highest concentration of ship names we've ever seen dropped in one place.
Indeed, and one of them is called the But Who's Counting.
I like it. Anyway.
So, 9-year callback to that. Granted, we have a 25-year callback to consider Phlebas, but I think the ship name thing is significantly more subtle.
Indeed. So, the main bulk of this chapter is learning about what Yaimon Sake's backstory is. So, TLDR.
I think you... Wait a minute.
No, I haven't described it yet.
No, you haven't, but I think you... Did I... Okay, the reason I'm confused is that I'm looking at Chapter 9 and I haven't even seen Yaim come up.
Oh dear. Is this the one that starts with, the lengthy bit about Trin and, Prin?
No, this starts with with a conversation between Ledej and Sensia about her getting put back into her body, and then Ledej wanting to go back to Sechult, and then a conversation about how Ledej isn't allowed to go back to Sechult without a slap drone. We can totally get to that. I don't mind talking about Yaim at all. Just, that is not how it begins.
I'm not sure. These are some very long chapters, and within the chapters there are cuts between the different threads. Like, the chapters do not break up the threads. So, I may have gotten a little confused with my note-taking. But, yeah, let's just give it in order of the threads. So we're talking about Yaim. Let's just finish talking about Yaim, and then we'll go on to the next thing.
Oh, Quietus thing I want to bring up before I forget. So we have established previously that the Earth must have been contacted sometime prior to the 23rd century, because the the conjoint events of use of weapons and consider Phlebas require that. But what is apparent briefly in this chapter that is not apparent anywhere else is that Earth appears to have had some kind of influence on the culture, because the GCU that is transporting Yaim for this job is called the Bodhisattva.
Well, yes, but I think I remember that we also discussed another ship name was based on a specifically American, or not American, but a specific cultural phrase that wouldn't make sense outside of anything else. I believe the Pure Big Mad Boatman was mentioned as something that, like, unless there is an exact equivalent to Space Ireland,
Scotland,
or that is a shockingly specific translation, then that would have to be a reference to Earth.
Yes. There's also a ship, I believe it's mentioned in the State of the Art, called It'll Be Over by Christmas, which is a famous failed prophecy in Britain regarding World War I.
Right, but that one includes a note saying it is the closest translation of a phrase that appears in a lot of different languages.
That's fair.
But with slightly different context.
Fair. At any rate, do you think that there's much else to say about Yaim, because we still have the Ledej and Prin and Che segments?
No, I think there is absolutely more stuff to say about Yaim, and it's her backstory. We learned that she was, from a young age, super talented to the point that she always knew that she could pretty much do whatever she wanted, but she felt a calling to go to the Quietus organization. But the Quietus organization is seen as broadly less prestigious than Special Circumstances. So, she made sure that she engineered her life such that she got an invitation to Special Circumstances so that she could turn it down and go to Quietus instead. And then, once she was in Quietus, she found that that kind of behavior makes you generally untrusted, because you're the sort of person who would at least kind of manipulate people in order to get what you want, because she had to be under at least somewhat false pretenses in order to get that invitation to Special Circumstances. So she has not gotten any good jobs up until now. That's why she was sitting around on that orbital not doing anything, doing training drills. And this is the first good job she's gotten.
Fair. That is a good thing to bring up. Aside from that section, and as you say, it is a giant pain in the ass that the 3 points of view in this chapter are woven together the way they are, hopping back and forth. Because, yes, it makes it really...
It's not confusing as far as how it gets across information. It's just confusing as far as how it...
No, it's not confusing as you read it.
To talk about.
Yes, it makes it confusing to talk about. The tendency of Quietus to take itself too seriously applies even to the ships who add a suffix to their name while they're doing Quietus business. And also the fact that SC people apparently refer to Quietus because of its dealings with the dead as probate is hilarious to me.
So, I worked in a law office, and I still don't know what probate actually
probate
means.
Probate is the court or court process that deals with wills.
Interesting.
At any rate, yeah, she gets some description of her job. We went over the Bodhisattva already. I want to read more into that. We don't have any, there's no basis for it here, but given how much in human fiction AIs tend to like Buddhism, that's interesting.
So, I think I cut you off before you could give any more detail on it. For any unfamiliar, what is the concept of the Bodhisattva?
Someone in Buddhism who has achieved enlightenment. So I am not a Buddhist, and my understanding of this may be very flawed. If we have a Buddhist listening, I would really love to hear about this at release. But my understanding of it is that it's someone who's achieved enlightenment and yet remains on Earth for purpose of assisting other people in achieving enlightenment. In the Scott Alexander story Samsara, there is some discussion of this. The Bodhisattva's vow says that even once you've achieved enlightenment, you do not go on to nirvana until literally everyone else in creation has achieved enlightenment.
Which is interesting, right? Because we have an analog to enlightenment in these stories. Going sublime is very much like getting enlightened in a lot of ways, because it means that you can fuck off out of reality and go do greater things. But it also means that you can no longer care about the material concerns of reality.
Or at least that you usually don't.
The implication... Right. Minor exceptions for the Chelgri and Puin, but they're literally the only ones who
also,
ever did.
hey, there's the Draezon.
Yeah, they weren't really sublimed. They were just higher.
I thought they were specifically called out as sublimed in Accession, but...
I don't think they were.
Well,
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, listeners, because I don't remember perfectly, but I'm pretty sure the Draezon are just they're described as something slightly different. They're described as generally fucked off, but not as sublimed. They don't care much about reality, but they do care a little because they have these art projects they want to maintain.
Fair summary. Yes. If Johnny's wrong, please tell us.
Yes. If GSV's wrong, also tell us, I guess, if you know. Yes, so the implication of naming yourself Bodhisattva is that you have the wisdom of the sublimed, or you have kind of the abilities or the knowledge or the context or whatever of the sublimed, but you've chosen to still be here, which doesn't seem true, because the Sublimed have special superpowers, and this guy doesn't, at least as far as we know. So it's kind of a pretentious name.
I repeat, Buddhism appeals a lot to AIs in fiction. I've never totally understood why, but it doesn't seem unreasonable for an alien AI to possibly take a similar interest.
I suppose. I would find it much more interesting if, like, the Puin had been given, like, one of many monikers the Puin could be Bodhisattva, and it would be much more apt than calling this asshat Bodhisattva.
Okay, that's fair.
Like, he's not enlightened, or at least not as far as we know, or he's not any more enlightened than any of his peers.
I mean, it's a ship. It's definitely more enlightened than us.
Sure, but it's not more enlightened than other ships, so it's a weird thing to claim. Yeah, I'm more enlightened than an ant, but that's not particularly what people are talking about.
I mean, so depending on how bad your definition of enlightenment is, one could argue that the ant freed from desire is more enlightened than you.
I am rolling my eyes harder than you can imagine.
If you can't hear my grin, trust me, I'm grinning.
I knew, as soon as I picked it, I was like, I should have picked a shittier animal, because GSP is going to make some fucking point here.
Oh god, stop saying that like it's a bad thing. We have to have tangents.
Yeah, that's true. We're doing better this time. We're still not done, and we've had more content on this episode. Content, TM.
Yes.
Anyway.
Is there anything else you want to cover about the Yaim thread of this chapter, though? I think we actually have hit the important stuff.
I do not. So is the Prin and Shay stuff also in this chapter?
Yes.
Okay, so Prin and Shay. Prin wakes up. He is in a
very medical sounding room.
He's in a cyberpunk warehouse. He's in the medical room of a cyberpunk warehouse, basically, because there's a bunch of people around him that are like hackers who helped him get into this situation.
Plus a medical guy who monitored their hacking into the Matrix /Hell/whatever.
Hell Matrix. Gotta be a better name for that.
Hatrix?
No. Something with like demonic patterns. Surely there's a name for numbers or patterns that are demonic in nature, and that would be a good name for a simulated Matrix hell.
I will ask someone who we both know, who, as far as I know, does not listen to this podcast, but definitely would know that sort of thing.
I think I know who you're talking about. I mean, I know in Warhammer 40k, there's the concept of numbers of the damned, right? It's one of the reasons that AIs fall to chaos so often, is there are certain numbers in the 40k universe that if you happen to think of them, or write them down, or see them, then you become corrupted by chaos. So if a computer happens to randomly generate that number, they might get corrupted by chaos.
I'm actually thinking of someone else who shares the first name of that person.
I see. Anyway.
And I already got corrupted by chaos because my cat's named after one of the gods.
Indeed. So yeah, Prin wakes up there. Shay does not wake up. As you might have suspected, he made it out. She did not. He is very depressed about this, as you would expect. They consider what options they have. Because Shay's mind was put into the simulated hell, they can either keep her asleep indefinitely, or they can wake her up, and her mind will be...
both in hell and reality.
Well, there will be a, shall we say, version of her that is in hell and was in hell for several months. There will be another version of her that woke up, that just immediately woke up and doesn't have any memories of what happened in hell, because you didn't re-download and resync. So instead, you just have a fundamentally sort of different person.
And the reason that this choice is so important is that if they do the second thing, then literally every second that passes until they reintegrate the hell version of her will make the process more difficult and potentially damaging.
Yes, because there will have to be sort of a convergence between the two things in which all of the sort of different experiences that they've had converge towards each other into a mutually understandable whole, and if it's been like a fair bit of time, that's not going to work, and it might like cause her brain to explode.
It reminded me kind of Rationalist McGonagall's Transfiguration lecture. How even solid things undergo subtle changes in their internals over time?
I suppose there is some similarity there, but, like, for me, I was mostly just thinking... it brought to mind more transporter problem type stuff for me. Like, what is continuity of thought and what is continuity of existence? And in her case, it's like, well, if you just went to sleep and you were unconscious and then you woke up with these memories in your head, there's not really much discontinuity. However, if you went to sleep, woke up, and then a different version of you that had done different things is, like, tried to be forced into your head, there's going to be some discontinuity there.
Yes. Like, the way that this is set up totally makes sense.
Yep. And they basically described that based on their information, worst case scenario, permanent damage if they wait more than a couple hours after waking her up. Best case scenario, she could maybe be reintegrated after a week.
In any case, it sounds like a really bad idea. They mentioned it starts to be a bad idea within even hours.
Yeah.
And Prin decides, well...
Realistic case scenario, if they got her mind back within, like, a day, you know, they could probably... It would probably be fine.
Yeah. In any case...
but they're not going to get her mind back within a day, because obviously she's not coming through.
In any case, Prin is extremely... he does not look fondly on the idea of waking her up and then going back to a relationship with this woman that never saw hell. Yeah, that's horrifying to him.
In his eyes, she's just a fundamentally different person. Basically.
Yes, or he is. It's the distinction is not hugely important, actually.
Yeah, I guess vis-a-vis predictions, I can't help but notice that we've now got a mind floating around somewhere that won't have a body to call home, and we also have just learned that the culture keeps a bunch of spare bodies around for minds that are floating around to call home. So, if there is a resolution to this plot arc in that way, that seems like a pretty clean one. You could upload her mind into a culture spare body in the material reality. If you assume that this is the material reality, and not also a simulation going on in the world.
Like that fucking Rick and Morty episode, which is actually one of my favorites.
There were a lot of Rick and Morty episodes.
The one with the scammers, where they... Spoilers for Rick and Morty episode, like season 2, episode 4 or something. Put him into a simulation so that when he breaks out of it and is still in a simulation, he'll think that he's free and unintentionally provide them the information they want, still being monitored.
What we call a pro gamer move.
Yeah, but instead he knows that they put him in 3 levels of simulation, so he gives them fake information that will cause them to get killed. Spoilers for Rick and Morty episode, like season 2, episode 4 or something.
You know, I know it's the bit that we give spoilers after we say the spoilers, but you realize I have to actually cut those back into the right place later when this is edited.
Okay, I feel like if it's 2 seasons behind, or yeah, season 4 has finished. Do we actually have to mark spoilers for one episode that's 2 seasons old? That'd be...
I mean, it is a largely twist-based episode, I would...
Oh, that's fair. Okay. I hadn't actually considered that. I was gonna say, like, I liked Game of Thrones until they got past the pre-written material, and I still know things about the ending, even though I've never seen it, because, well, I can't really complain about spoilers for something that ended that long ago.
Fair enough. So, is there any other stuff in Chapter 9?
We haven't talked at all about the Ledej segment.
Right, so, Ledej basically says, hey, I still want to go back to the enablement. What is the fastest way back that I could reasonably take? And the ship is like, yeah, we'll get you on a ship as soon as possible. But, real quick, you're probably gonna try to murder Vepers, right? And Ledej is like, I'm not only gonna try to murder Vepers. And the ship is like, yeah, that's pretty much what I thought. We're gonna need to give you a slap drone so that you don't murder Vepers, because, like, we just don't go around condoning people murdering each other.
Unless you convince everyone in the culture to tell me that I shouldn't.
Yes. And Ledej is like, if you've seen Clone High, imagine me doing the Clone High raising hands gesture. But what about utilitarianism? And the ship is like, we don't really truck with that when it comes to other civilizations. We kind of just let them do what they want to do, especially in cases where it's the people in the civilization who have a lot of power and authority. We kind of try to respect those things. because for some goddamn reason we give a shit. So, Ledej is like, well, you're all a bunch of fucking useless people if you can't deal with serious moral quandaries when they happen to be politically inconvenient to you. So fuck all of you and I'll take the slap drone. Thank you very much.
And then she ponders, because she does not realize remotely how out of her depth she is, how easy it would be to either lose or just kill the slap drone.
Yes. Yeah. Does not know a lot about slap drones, clearly, because from what we've seen, like, the chances of a human killing a drone in general, very unlikely. The last time we saw someone do that, it was Zakalwe, and that was very hard.
And that wasn't even a full combat drone. That was a less than sapient knife missile.
Indeed. And he had to, like, do a whole thing with lasers. I don't think she knows how to do a whole thing with lasers.
Not just lasers. He had to trick it into flying into an MRI machine and then turn it on so it couldn't fly out without frying itself, and then fry it with a laser.
You fool, it's the classic blunder.
I want to know more books you read that make that classic.
I mean, yeah, what else could I say in the context of such a ridiculously specific and convoluted way to kill someone, other than, that old hat.
Oldest trick in the book.
Yeah. Don't go into an MRI machine, obviously.
Or you could tell me which Simpsons episode it happened in.
Well, that I do not know. I haven't actually watched The Simpsons.
It was a joke that South Park made that literally everything has been tried on The Simpsons at some point. Butters goes kind of nuts when he tries and persistently fails to come up with a plan that hasn't been tried in a Simpsons episode. And when he finally snaps...
Everyone just being like, Season 13, Episode 4.
That is how that goes.
It's like, damn.
And someone says, but everything was already done even before The Simpsons. Like, that one Simpsons episode that you're worried about just rips off a Twilight Zone episode.
Indeed.
But yeah, so there's the slap drone. We didn't really talk about the discourse on hegemonizing swarms.
There wasn't much of it, as I recall. It was pretty much just like, these tend to be dangerous for a little while, and then they generally get dealt with, and one of them might be heading towards that factory that Vepers has nominal control of, and gaining actual control of it. And if that happened, it would be very bad.
It is already in it. The infestation happened at some point in the past, and Restoria, the pest control people in Contact, have apparently been doing a good job of containing it. But it is still there, and so they need to be aware of that. It also includes a really interesting discussion, or an interesting phrasing of the sort of problem that requires some amount of attention, but not priority exactly. Smatter was the name given to the bitty remains of a hedge swarm after it had been stamped out as a coherent threat. Usually it didn't last significantly longer than the outbreak itself and just got mopped up. If some bits did persist, then while you could never afford to ignore the stuff, you didn't really need to fear it. And I found that distinction I really like that turn of phrase.
Indeed. Yeah, so, I swear to God, if this is another situation like Matter, spoilers for how Matter ends, where it's just like, there's this whole book about how it's Vepers that's gonna get killed by Ledej, and that's our main emotional hook. And then at the end, it's like, and then both of them die because there's a hegemonizing swarm. I swear to God.
That would be an interesting turn, given the number of subplots that have been set up at this point, and it would be very frustrating if that happened.
It would be more frustrating because it would be the second time in a row. Once is clever, twice is, you're playing a tune I already know.
Yeah, that it would be odd to encounter that in consecutive books.
Yeah. Of course, the hegemonizing swarm could also just eat everything, simulating the war in heaven and force a stalemate.
That's, I guess, also an option. Only two, very tiny asides I'll make before we get into the last chapter. We get the name of an, I think, previously undisclosed class of offensive unit that the me I'm counting as an example of, the hooligan. Continuing the culture's theme of having...
That's not... No, we've heard of many hooligans before. Hooligan class has
Have
definitely
we? There are killers, murderers, torturers. I don't remember encountering a hooligan before.
I'm almost entirely certain that we've seen who. Let me check the Ian M. Banks wiki, or the culture wiki. Hooligan class. Mentioned in Surface Detail Chapter 9 and Accession Chapter 8.
That, I was going to say, if we'd encountered it anywhere, it's if it's an LOU now, then we probably encountered it in an Accession, and that makes sense. The other is the name of... Oh, we didn't even bring up the Forgotten. So the...
Oh, yeah, so the Forgotten are basically described as being a last line of defense against total cultural extinction. This is capital C, cultural extinction, because they keep themselves up to date with cultural politics and news and what's going on by just listening to broadcasts, but they otherwise don't do anything detectable to the rest of the universe. They just go off and seemingly vanish. And as a result, if the culture were to ever be wholly destroyed, they would act as the last form of backup, as a thing that could repopulate and reseed the culture either in this galaxy or another one, so that their whole civilization is not at threat of being wiped out.
Although, as Yaim reflects, any threat big enough to destroy the visible parts of the culture is... Well, either they can probably find the Forgotten, or this reflects an existential flaw in the culture so deep that the Forgotten themselves are likely to have it.
To which the ship talking to her is pretty much just like, yeah, but, if it happens to end up being necessary, because we happen to encounter exactly the kind of threat which is defeated by these kinds of countermeasures, we will be really happy to have done it.
Yes. Hang on, there was... So, one, I absolutely love the name of the particular Forgotten under discussion. Total Internal Reflection is a really good nerdy reference for this.
I'm not familiar. What does it mean?
This is definitely something you will encounter in like any college physics class where they cover optics. If you have if light hits like an interface between two different media at the right angle, which is dependent on the properties of the two media, then instead of passing out, say like if you fire a laser beam into a plastic block that's in air, at the right angle of incidence, when the beam hits the surface of the block, instead of passing out into air, it will be fully reflected inside the block. And if the medium's the right shape, this sequence of total reflections can continue for a while.
Very cool.
And it has to do, like I said, with the refractive index of the two media. That is how much they slow down the average transit of light.
And in this case, it's probably a pun on the fact that it's using this time alone to reflect on its life and sort of muse about stuff.
Everyone knows that jokes are funnier when we explain them.
Yes, this is a long-standing policy of this podcast, as we mention every time that we mention it. Anyway...
The other thing, real-world parallel to how the Forgotten operate. So their way of keeping up on what goes on in the galaxy, as the chapter discusses, is to sit in deep space, not sending any communications, and just listening to news that the culture broadcasts. And because it's broadcast, there's no way of telling who it's intended for. You can always tell the source, but not the destination, because the destination is literally everywhere. There is a real-world counterpart to this, which is kind of cool, the numbers station.
I am familiar with this. The broadcast from various mysterious undisclosed locations, number stations repeat a endless series of seemingly random numbers for no known purpose, because even if you know it's there, you don't know what that code links to, so you can't really identify what it's being used for. It's just a signal that people can listen to.
Yep, sent over shortwave, which means that you can't identify the source because shortwave broadcasts can bounce off, I think, the ionosphere and travel around large fractions of the planet. If you're planning carefully, usually using synthetic voices so that the accent of the person reading the numbers can provide no clue as to the origin of the broadcast, and presumably encrypted with a one-time pad, which makes them literally unbreakable even with infinite computational power if the people who did the encrypting have done their jobs properly.
Mm-hmm.
There's a remarkably boring subculture of people who listen to these, or who catalog numbers stations and listen to them.
I can't see why you'd bother unless you're assuming the people who run the number station are very lazy about their code keeping.
Well, one of the things that might be of interest is that I guess with enough data points on where the same station is receivable, you might be able to draw inferences about the source.
Oh, yeah, I suppose there is that.
And some people just like digging into secrets. I can understand the impulse, just number stations sound uniquely unsatisfying for that purpose.
Are you familiar with the bit about the number station in Welcome
Yes.
to Night Vale?
That's actually where I learned of the concept.
It's go listen to Welcome to Night Vale, people. It's another one of the podcasts that I would recommend that is better than this podcast, and you should go listen to that.
Considering that it has like 1 million times our views, I think I would be very surprised if anyone listening to us has not heard of Night Vale.
I don't know. I don't think we have a perfect cross-section of viewership, right? Because, like, the people who are interested in Night Vale need not necessarily be interested in literary analysis or Ian M. Banks, which I imagine is our main two.
I suppose that's fair. In any case, that, I think, beats to death Chapter 9 and everything that we would want to talk about in it.
Indeed. So, 10. Basic structure of 10. Ledege is strongly discouraged by multiple stark examples of just how nasty the culture can be from going against the culture's wishes, and thus, quote-unquote, decides to go on the ship that the GSB chartered for her. We also see Yaim musing about how this is the first good job she got since she pulled off the SC thing. We learn about that here.
Yes. Also, she's been freshly emplaced in a new body and has evidently been asked about her genitalia. And we learn that apparently the culture default, or at least the segment of the culture default used to generate the not Sechultian body that she now occupies, unlike, say, humans, does not have a hymen.
Yes. Which she finds mildly disconcerting. She did go out looking for sex. The exact reason why is mildly unclear.
I mean, hey, every time I get murdered, the first thing I want to do afterward is get laid.
Yes, well, I can't argue with that, I suppose. But, I mean, certainly there is a degree of, like, implicit liberation there with, like, she wants to have some pleasant experiences on her own terms rather than in the context of being forced to do everything she is doing. So, there's that. And also, sex, I have heard, is fun, and people like doing it. So it could also be that she's had a pretty stressful day.
Other thing we learn early in this chapter, which I deliberately did not discuss with you for all these books, is why our Not Safe for Work channel has the name that it does.
Yeah, so the Divinity in Extremis is basically a nightclub for horny culture people. It's a drug bar / sex-based cultural event. And it is also the channel that we use when NSFW topics come up.
Listeners, if you're not on our Discord server, that is one of the things that we have, and you can join our Discord server at the link in the description of this episode or any other, I think, since we created it. Also,
yes.
It's not just the drugs.
Is...
There's a mention, I think, of some people doing the like Western movie style tied together knife fights.
Yeah, I mean, it is a, what's the term? Wretched hive of scum and villainy, as I put it and as I said in the very early episodes when I was talking about Azadian super cool bar. This is much the same in many ways, except it's for the culture and everyone's presumably here consensually, so it's less morally dubious.
Yeah, instead it's more for people who are just kind of weird in a couple of specific violent and narcotic ways.
And one of the ways that we see that is that, like, she goes up to somebody, starts asking him questions, her terminal interrupts her, and someone just, like, grabs her terminal and chucks it away without asking her, because it's bothering him. So, apparently this is not a very, personal space / property respecty place and environment, which, some people enjoy that sort of thing, and I'm not here to kink shame, but clearly, she should not have ignored the warnings that she was given about coming here.
At any rate, she continues her quest to find a way to get back to Sechult without a slap drone. She's, the guy she's talking to, well, she says she's looking for an avatar, And he thought she was looking for sex, and she says, well, both, but... What? You want to have sex with an avatar? And she says, well, I'm not saying no, but these are separate quests.
Like, not necessarily. I mean, I guess, but, you know, I'm not specifically looking
Given
to do
that meatfucker is mentioned repeatedly in the series to be an exceedingly grave insult, and the only ship we've seen express anything along the lines of sexual interest in a human, or the only avatar of a ship, is Quike in Matter, that would be somewhat exceptional.
And the sleeper service in Accession.
Oh, right, yes. It made the avatar that looked like a normal, like a standard human in order to seduce Beer to see if he would stay faithful to Degil.
To be fair, no, that isn't quite what happened. It made the avatar to talk to him, and then Beer was immediately like, hey, sexy lady, want a sexy lady? And, you know, she just sort of went along with it.
Okay, yes, now that I remember that scene, that is a more accurate description of what happened. But the implication kind of is that the ship wanted to see if... Like, the ship going along with that is interesting.
I mean, there's no reason she wouldn't have done it if she didn't, like, want to. Maybe she wasn't attracted to him, but nevertheless, she did choose to do it. So,
oh, now that I see the text, I was wrong. Not a knife fight. They're having a bare-knuckle boxing match with their ankles tied together, you know, so they can't avoid each other.
That sounds more like a punching the shit out of each other contest than a boxing match.
I mean, that's how boxing worked before gloves.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah.
So until like the middle of the 19th century, at least, since the London prize ring rules did not require gloves, and the Marquess of Queensberry rules, which came later, did.
I've heard certain Magic the Gathering decks described in terms of being kind of like a hockey fight, in that you, like, grab your opponent by the shirt and unload fists into their face while they do the same to you until one of you falls over.
That is how a lot of fights without weapons work.
Yes.
I mean, unless somebody's got... Maybe there's a wet floor that can end things quickly, or you get lucky, or you've got surprise. But yes, I suppose if you're talking about a fair fight, which I think is a really stupid thing to get into, then that... Yes.
Best avoided.
Especially one-on-one. One of the 70 maxims of maximally effective mercenaries is that the best way to win a one-on-one fight is to arrive third.
Indeed. Man, we do need to read that comic. Those are fun. Anyway, so, important events. Ledege meets a avatar of a ship called the
Armchair Traveler.
Yeah, Armchair Traveler. The Armchair Traveler is like it is a contact ship. And she basically says, hey, I want passage to Sucholt, but I want it from someone not too terribly well behaved. Which, hey, if you're gonna try to get the attention of a contact/SC ship, that's not a bad way to do it.
Yeah, but this one is just contact and not SC, and so the avatar, Jalichi, is very determined to impress on Ledege that this might not be such a good idea.
Yeah. It takes her up to an elevator shaft, threatens to drop her in, and says, look, you don't know what you're getting into. Any danger I might subject you to is nothing compared to the danger you would put yourself in by interacting with special circumstances. They are incredibly dangerous. They will not respect your wishes. They will do stuff that you don't want them to do, and you don't know what you're getting into. You should not try to interact with special circumstances. Please take me seriously on this. Now, let's go talk to someone from special circumstances. And then he takes her to someone from special circumstances, who gives an even worse impression about what might happen if she doesn't go along with the culture's beliefs about her best interests. Because in addition to just being generally a prick, the warship that she sees is tormenting a human with, like, really fetishistic undertones. So the guy won a contest, apparently, to have his body used as the avatar for a culture ship. The warship volunteered to be the one to use his body as an avatar, and he is using his body in ways that the guy definitely wouldn't consent to, and making him feel the things that are happening to it, because he just likes punishing ignorance, I suppose.
Specifically, he keeps a harem of bears around to have gay sex with, because the gentleman is, what's Demeisen's exact phrasing? Almost defiantly heterosexual.
Yeah, bears in the, homosexual context rather than bears in the literal context.
Considering how much of an asshole the ship is acting like, though, maybe both?
Yeah.
I thought the context, though, would be sufficient.
Yes. But in addition to that, it's also just more straightforward stuff, like putting out a cigarette on the dude's hand and making him wiggle his fingers around when they're broken.
And using
sort of
drugs
stuff.
that cause vicious hangovers.
Yeah, because he can't feel it, but the guy can. So he's just making this guy's life miserable. That is... So, the Armchair Traveler says that is just about at the hard limits of the bad kind of situation that you can get into if you consent to it despite everyone's best wishes. I'm not sure if I quite buy that. This seems more like the kind of thing that could be engineered to convince Ledege to do as she's told.
Possible. The ship definitely goes for less subtlety in its name than we're accustomed to from warships. The warship in question calls itself the Falling Outside the Normal Moral Constraints.
Yep, a lot more literal than usual. Yeah, the Armchair Traveler describes it as coming from an era when the culture was a bit concerned about being seen as insufficiently serious and willing to get stuff done. But even from things created in that era and eras of that sort, it is notable for being especially nasty.
I mean, if you want that characteristic anywhere, it's probably in your warships.
I suppose so, but it seems downright sadistic.
Again.
I suppose. Anyway, with that, Ledege says, alright, fuck it, I'll go on the ship you want me to which the GSV says, I knew you would anyway. And then, I think it's something like, alright, send me out on the ship you wanted this morning. And the GSV is like, I had already made the arrangements.
Really? You're going to skip over the whole lovely conversation between Ledege and Demeisen?
By all means.
I love that Ledege is actually trying to pitch it this way. She asks the ship for passage, the warship, and the warship is immediately skeptical. That this whole conversation has a lot of quotable bits, so I'm going to try to keep them brief. One imagines that a taxi would suffice, unless the gentleman concerned can only be dispatched using a warship. A state-of-the-art...
This is after she just said that the reason she wants to travel to the place is so she can kill somebody.
Yeah. A state-of-the-art culture warship, at that, if I may make so immodest. For some reason, the word overkill leaps to mind. And then she mentions the slap drone, and he gets more condescending. So you were stupid enough to let slip that you intend to kill this man. Oh dear, might I suggest that this does not bode terribly well should your murderous plans include more than the absolute minimum of guile, subterfuge, or, dare I say it, intelligence? My highly limited empathic capacities remain resolutely unengaged.
Yes.
That last part it's quotable, and I've not had occasion to use it, but I do have it stored in mentally and things to say if I ever need to lay it on that thick.
Yeah, I mean, again, in addition to the more direct examples of sadism, he's just generally an asshole to her and refuses to help her at all.
Yeah, and then we get we get the details of how the ship has been mistreating its avatar all this time. And I think that covers all of the Ledege section of this chapter. There's also the Yaim bit that we should probably get to.
Yeah, so with
sorry, actually, the Ledege thing. She decides this part of the Avatar quest having not worked out, that the sex portion of the quest is something she should still pursue. And as Jalichi puts it, the knight is yet middle-aged.
Yeah, I did like that one as well. I think she literally says, I want to go off and have a meaningless sexual encounter with someone.
Yes, preferably with someone as good-looking as Demeisen's harem.
And then we kind of cut over to Yaim. So we see Yaim musing about how she had her sex organs removed. She just has a little nub down there, which she can urinate from.
So she's like half transitioned in the way the culture does.
Yeah, she can't feel anything down there. Touching herself, she describes it as feeling no more stimulating than touching a knuckle. Which, you know, the Quietas suck, man, but whatever, I guess, if that's what she's into.
I think Yaim's just kind of a masochist.
Not quite a masochist, more an Epicurean. She seems to disdain things that merely make her happy.
Like a hipster anti-hedonist, or what's the word I'm looking for?
Epicurean.
No, I'm an Epicurean. I like blue cheese and liverwurst and other things that taste good.
What is the moral philosophy I'm thinking of here? You know, that you avoid the sources of easy pleasure because you think those broadly don't lead to long-term fulfillment, but you seek out things that you find like mentally stimulating and emotionally and philosophically fulfilling. That seems more close to what she's doing.
Fair. Asceticism, that's what I was looking for. So some kind of ascetic hipster. I can see, like, maybe not wanting most sexual desire as a distraction, but voluntarily forsaking the ability to masturbate sounds a bit much.
Whatever. She still has her drug glands, even if she chooses not to use them most of the time, because she is, like... There's been a long-running contest for most prudish culture character, because a lot of the protagonists are unusually prudish by culture standards. Early first winner, Gurge. He maintained for a long time. Zakowe, maybe, regarding sex at least, but generally he was at least willing to give stuff a try. I think I think Yaim is gunning for the first place spot.
Oh, most certainly. Like, Gurge, like, being a prude was just kind of part of being Gurge. It was a characteristic he had. And Zakalwe, while he didn't embrace the culture's libertine sexuality or its love of narcotics, did get into various romantic relationships and have, yes. Even if his ideas about sex and gender roles were somewhat old-fashioned even by our standards, he could actually, like, deal with sex as part of life. Yaim is defining... She's referred to as she, right? Yes. Okay. So despite the neutering, just it's a habit I've had to develop. So Yaim appears to be making this avoidance of pleasure a defining personality component. Like, the lengths that she's described as going to in this chapter are just fucking ridiculous.
Yes. And I don't think we really learn much more about her. We just get a little more flavor about what she's thinking about regarding this mission and the general context of her life.
Yeah. Hang on. The way the chapter's laid out makes it confusing, so I'm navigating back to that part of the text. Drug glands, demysin, psychopathy. Okay, now we're back in the Yaim section. You kind of jumped the gun last time we were talking about Yaim, because this is where we go over the invitation to join Quietus versus SC.
I'm sorry, the multiple threads make things difficult.
I know.
Write down where everything...
Well, hey, as Wes pointed out, we don't need exactly to avoid spoilers, just I'm going to point out that we did things kind of out of order because I can't help it.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and she is free of SC, committed to Quietus. And reflecting on the whole trust thing, and I guess, nope, that actually ends it. The only other thing I'd bring up, since we have at this point gone over it, she's got an important job, she's finally in the right place at the right time. The only other thing I'd bring up in the text is the lovely contact proverb that ends the thought. Utility is 7/8 proximity.
As we've seen so often before, in fact, to the point that I commented on it as being kind of a trope of the civilization, and in universe a defining trait of the civilization, the culture has a lot of people everywhere, and they frequently surprise you with how close to the action they are when stuff goes down.
Yeah. Well, it matches pretty neatly onto the Woody Allen quote about how 90% of success is just showing up.
Fair enough.
Or one that someone I follow on Twitter commented recently apropos of a discussion about birth rates. The future belongs to the people who are alive then. Something like that.
Yeah, I guess so. So yeah, that's about all there is in the text. I did have a few general thoughts I wanted to talk about. So it really seems like the culture is being made to look unusually evil here by the standards that we've seen them act before. Like, we've seen, in use of weapons, we see that even though contact and special circumstances act with good reasons in mind, they occasionally do horrible things for, like, utilitarian purposes. This is not that. This is just people being a dick to Ledege because they want to control her. It's not much more than that. And as far as, like, not being willing to deal with Vepers, this gets at the same fundamental civilizational issue that I've talked about before, where, like, they don't seem to consider people in other civilizations morally relevant agents, right? Like, they don't care about what you want if you're in another civilization. Unless you're in the culture, they don't think that you have the same rights. The same rights to have your wishes respected. They're not going to give you the opportunity to just leave. And I know that that's largely because of practicalities, but it's nevertheless a moral thing they have to reckon with. And the book is pointing our attention to it.
So, from the conversation with Ledege and Sensia, I don't think that's exactly what's going on. Like, they offered her they offered her transport. And because this is a civilization without money, they're not asking anything in return. And Sensia explains that this slap drone is its attempt to grapple with the moral responsibility that it would feel, possibly sending her back to kill someone. I get the impression from their conversation that the slap drone, if she'd been asked to be sent to somewhere on the far side of the galaxy, that would not have been an issue.
That's not quite what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is the very fact that she's here means that the culture considers her a morally relevant agent. Like, the culture is very much a Copenhagen interpretation of ethics type group of people. Like, if they are talking to you, they think that you are a morally relevant agent. If they're not, they don't. Like, because she's here, they're going to respect her wishes. When she wasn't here, they were like, oh, well, we can't possibly take you away from this planet where you're a slave in an unjust society, because that would be stepping on the toes of your civilization. Like, they have their convictions, but they do not abide by those convictions when it is inconvenient to them. And, like, practicality reasons, you just can't always do that, and I'm sure they're doing stuff to try to improve the Sicholtian way of life in whatever way and to whatever extent, but nevertheless, they have an unwillingness to apply their standards equally to citizens and non-citizens. And to some, even if it's practicality, that is still something they have to reckon with.
I mean, Himmerantz did seem to feel bad about the realpolitik concerns that underlay its refusal to help Ledege directly. And that's probably related to why it didn't tell anyone about Ledege's neural lace.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's kind of making the enemy... It's kind of making the perfect the enemy of the good here, but nevertheless, the lack of activity that the culture seems to take when it comes to the personal lives of people is very frustrating, right? Like, why... I've said it 1,000 times, but, like, if it's so easy, why doesn't everyone on a primitive world have a neural lace, right? Like, if it has a 98% chance of being able to save you and rescue you to, this magical post-scarcity utopia, then why doesn't everyone have it? And it's because they care about their citizens more than anybody else, which, fine, you're a state, that's what you do, but nevertheless, when you have these grand altruistic, universalistic moral claims, it makes them a little hard to swallow.
Fair enough. Yeah, no, you've covered all of it. I was going to say, you're talking to someone who's, I don't know if I should call it a theodicy or an anti-theodicy, and I can't remember if we've talked about it on the podcast, but my answer to the problem of evil is that it doesn't exist, and if we believe it exists, we have merely misunderstood God's concept of good. So we can tell if something is moral by trying to do it. And if we succeed, then God's definitely okay with it. And if we fail, God might not be okay with it, but we might also just have failed.
I don't know what you're getting at with that. Like, this is not a story with gods in it.
No, so my response to a lot of there's a free will theodicy, which is ubiquitous and I think somewhat dumb, about how God preventing evil would interfere with human free will somehow. And that's stupid, because you can interfere with the actualization of the consequences of the desire to do evil without remotely interfering with people's ability to desire to do evil. Like in such a world, for example, if you pointed a gun at someone and fired it, and the result would be, if the result would be, basically you have a sort of checksum on physics that vetoes events if they would have immoral results. Point a gun at an innocent person and pull the trigger.
I don't want to get too far into a theodicy, too far into, like, 2 hours into a podcast, but I will say that you couldn't distinguish a world like that from a different world, because, like, it could be, in our world, if you're going full, like, we don't need evidence for our assertions, that any time you harm another person, that person is fake and non-sentient, you know? And that is just somehow worked out to be the case in advance by an omniscient thing.
Fair. Oh, and I was going to make a reference to something that I know you haven't read yet and that we've discussed doing a podcast like this about, so I'm not going to say anything.
Unsong?
Yes.
Well, we shall get to it one day, I hope.
Hopefully. And I guess everybody already got the thrust of my anti-theodicy. I don't need to throw out examples. So I think that's all that I wanted to talk about. Is there anything left you want to bring up?
Let me see. I know I had at least one prediction. Oh yeah, so the one prediction I wrote down, no fucking goddamn way does she want to do something so stupid as getting her picture back.
Fair. I mean,
that's what, I don't even know if they believe it, but that's what Quietus says they think she wants. No way. I'm sticking with my guns. I think she probably has a kid that she's going to look for. But even if it's not that, it's definitely not that she cares a lot about getting her picture.
Okay. That is a good prediction to have. We can check it if we ever learn the real motive for this. I like it. All right. So that should end our episode 2 about surface detail, folks. Join us again in 2 weeks for chapters 11 through 15. I've been the Limited Offensive Unit, Broken God. Good night, and enjoy yourselves. It's later than you think.